By the time the ninth envelope was opened, her lipstick had bled into the tiny cracks around her smile, and my son had stopped pretending he didn't know who I was. The room smelled like lemon polish and old money. The cameras were rolling because she insisted on capturing our new chapter for the family channel she started last spring. You'll see my hand rise in the corner of the frame, steady as a plumb line, and you'll hear my voice, clearer than the day I taught him to pronounce the letter R. Say, Lydia, you inherited $9 million from your brother last month. That should have bought you a conscience. Instead, it paid for a mask. You don't hear the rest because that's where she lunged for the envelopes, and Mark finally remembered what my hand feels like when it isn't holding a checkbook or a casserole dish. You only get that one sentence, and maybe, if you listen closely, the soft rip of a future coming undone. My name is Irene. I am 72 years old. I used to be the kind of woman who apologized to furniture if I bumped into it. I taught second grade for 39 years in a town where every fall looks like a postcard and every secret eventually sinks to the bottom of the river and waits. I liked lists and labels and small kindnesses, names on lunch bags written in block letters, mittens pinned to coats, a fresh bouquet on the piano before the winter concert. I believed the right behavior could coax the world toward fairness. Then 9 years happened. 9 years of my daughter-in-law turning my son against me by degrees so subtle I didn't notice until I was standing outside their house with a gift in my hands, and the porch light didn't come on. Lydia arrived in our lives with a winter coat that cost more than my first car and a laugh that made waiters rush to refill her water. She called me Irene instead of Mom and said it in a tone that was both praise and correction. Irene, you're so organized. Irene, you should try turmeric. Irene, they don't really do photo albums anymore. With each sentence, she made me just a little smaller, like a sweater washed too warm. What I remember most is the first time she took my son's hand in front of me and he let his fingers be rearranged. The gesture was nothing, moving his thumb from the outside to the inside when he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, but that small domestication told me everything. I had spent 30 years teaching Mark how to be gentle without being a ghost. Lydia taught him a shortcut: be agreeable with me, and be careless with everyone else. The distance started with calendar changes. Sunday dinners became Saturday texts. Not this week, too busy. Holidays slid. We'll celebrate on the 27th instead, less traffic, you understand. Then came the accidents, all of them so polite I thought maybe I was the one miscounting days. I'd arrive with a pie to find no one home, or I'd be home and miss a school play because the time was accidentally typed wrong. When I said something, there was always an apology long enough to sound sincere. I feel terrible, truly. Mark and I are just drowning, you know how it is. I did know. I had been drowning and working and saving and making ordinary miracles my whole life, but apparently nobody saw that as expertise anymore. Then the voicemails started. Not to me, about me. One night, I left my reading glasses at their place after babysitting. The next morning, my phone lit up with their home number, and, before I could say hello, the call clicked off. The voicemail caught Lydia's voice through the accidental dial. We have to set boundaries, babe. She's not healthy for us. A door closed. Water ran. The sound of cabinets being opened and shut like punctuation. She'll help herself to our life if we let her. In the quiet after the message, I looked around my little kitchen and took stock of what I had helped myself to. The table my husband sanded 3 times to get rid of a ring from a lemonade pitcher in 1989. A cork board with drawings from students who now had mortgages of their own. The casserole dish with a crack hairline thin and indestructible. I sat down and put my hands flat on the table, the way I used to teach children to center themselves before a test. We breathe in for 4, I would say. Hold for 2, out for 6. It didn't fix anything then, either, but it gave your fear a shape. Mark called less. When he did, it was on commuter walks between his garage and his front door, 10 minutes authored by others. Lydia says hello, he'd add, breathless, like he'd remembered a missed homework assignment. When I asked to see the kids, there were schedules and sicknesses. We'd come by, Mom, but the baby's nap window is brutal. I learned that a nap window is something you can use to close any conversation. The last time I brought it up, he said, Mom, she's trying. You have to try too. He said it with the voice he used to correct his own children, and I realized the punishment for raising a caring son is that someone less caring will weaponize his kindness. I didn't stop loving him. I tried to stop making it so easy for them to mistake my love for free labor. 9 years. One for each of our town's churches. One for each of the peonies that still push up through the earth beside my porch, no matter how many times snow sits heavy on their stems. And then Lydia's brother died. Ethan was a man who filled rooms with a silence other people respected. He was 6 years younger than Lydia, divorced twice, very good at sailing and not much else. He owned an apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked at the city like it was a problem he had solved. The papers called him a philanthropist in the careful way they use a word when what they mean is rich. I met him once at a dinner where the napkins seemed to have opinions about where they should be placed. He shook my hand and said, "Thank you for everything you do," as if I had donated a wing to his hospital and not just made a pie. He died of a heart nobody knew was breaking. The news reached me via a group text I hadn't realized I was still on. Ethan passed suddenly, Lydia wrote, followed by a white dove emoji she must have picked by scrolling past 40 better choices. We're devastated but grateful. There was a link to a memorial fund. There was no funeral invitation. What there was 2 months later was a photo of Lydia on a balcony, her hair caught perfectly by a wind I doubt existed that day. The caption, "Life reminds us how to live." #gratitude, #new beginnings. Someone in the comments asked about a rumor. Did you inherit? Lydia wrote back, "He wanted the best for me," and added a heart, a star, and a champagne bottle I hoped she'd have to pay for with cash. The number 9 million didn't appear in the public announcements. I learned it because I still know how to read where other people skim. Probate records are public. Anyone can walk into a courthouse and ask to see how a rich man's money is learning to live without him. I wore my raincoat because the courthouse always feels like February, and I brought a pen because I was raised to never take something from a place without leaving something of your own. My name and the case number written down by the clerk took me back to the blue binders of my classroom days, the plastic smell of organization, the small thrill of rules obeyed. The file was heavy. The will was sleek. It read like a person who believed words can do anything if there are enough of them. There were trusts within trusts, a foundation for emerging futures, and bequests with adjectives so careful you knew they had been lawyered into meaninglessness. But there it was. To my sister, Lydia Fontaine, $9 million in unrestricted funds. People say money is a mirror. I think it's a magnifying glass. It doesn't change who you are, it just makes your choices easier to see. Within a week, Lydia's car changed. Then her watch. Then the tone of her texts to Mark. They went from directive to imperial. "Tell your mother we're busy" became, "Please ensure Irene doesn't drop by unannounced. We're filming." She started a channel called Fontaine Family Forward, where she posted videos of my grandchildren eating smoothies the color of pond water and Mark assembling furniture with the masculinity of a man who paid someone else to put in the pilot holes. I watched one. Then I turned off my laptop, looked at the fridge where a crooked magnet still held a permission slip from years ago, and allowed myself a feeling that wasn't hurt or rage. It was something quieter, more useful. If you've lived long enough, you know that revenge is the worst word for the best instinct. What I wanted wasn't to hurt them. It was to tilt the floor back to level. I wanted the truth to stand up and introduce itself. You don't spend 4 decades in a classroom without learning to investigate tenderness. Children lie for silly reasons and terrible ones. They hide me notes inside library books. They tell you they lost their homework and then show you a folded paper with their mother's handwriting on it that says, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." You learn to see what's under. So I made a list titled What I Know. Then a list titled What I Can Prove. Lists will save you when your heart cannot. What I know. 1. 9 years ago, Lydia started moving Mark like furniture. 2. She dislikes uncurated grief, unmonetizable effort, and anyone who wants a photo taken without filters. 3. Ethan's estate is the size of our town's library roof fund, times 38. 4. Lydia believes kindness is a service provided by women to her. What I can prove. 1. Ethan's will leaves Lydia $9 million. 2. Lydia is listed as interested person and personal representative alternate. 3. Lydia's emails to the foundation include, will streamline, which is a word that always means someone will be cut out. 4. 2 charities named in the will received less than what the documents said they would, if you do the math correctly. 5. When Lydia says she wants a family-only afternoon, she means no Irene. The courthouse has a smell that is 50% paper and 50% people trying very hard not to be themselves. I spent 3 mornings there over 2 weeks, reading with my finger sliding down the columns like a metronome. I copied what I needed. I stapled in the upper left corner because order is a kind of prayer. And then I called 3 people. First, I called Luella, who sat beside me at choir for 22 years and who retired from the IRS with a hobby of crosswords and audits. She believes numbers are the only moods that make sense. Bring me what you have, she said, not pretending to be surprised. I'll make tea. Second, I called May, a former county clerk whose idea of a good afternoon is a file cabinet and a problem. She can tell a forged signature like some people can tell a lie. Meet me at the senior center after lunch, she said. We'll take the chess table. Nobody uses it since Ron died. Third, I called Emmett, who used to run the local paper when it was still printed and has despised Lydia since she told him print is over at a fundraiser after he refused to remove a line about her unpaid parking tickets. Irene, he said, I'm old and bored. Give me a reason to remember why I liked my job. The 4 of us met on a Thursday. There are moments when the average age of a conspiracy should be 81 and a half. The detective work didn't look like the movies. There were no midnight stakeouts or trench coats. There were legal pads and peanut butter crackers and a printer that needed the same 2 pages shook and reinserted before it agreed to do its job. Luella brought highlighters in 6 colors. May brought sticky tabs. Emmett brought cookies and grudges. We divided the work. Luella took the filings from Ethan's estate and walked the numbers back to their beginnings. May studied signatures, dates, and the oddities of timing. Emmett pulled social posts, deleted videos, and that interview Lydia gave a podcast host with a laugh too bright to be believed. I handled the one job for which my life had prepared me, assembling chaos into a lesson plan. A pattern started to gleam through the dust. The foundation Ethan had set up in his 30s, quiet, old-fashioned, generous in precise ways, had been rebranded posthumously by Lydia as a sleek portfolio of impact projects. The documents showed round numbers where there should have been odd cents and odd cents where there should have been round numbers. One small charity that once received $$25,000 a year now had a pledge of $$2,500 pending board approval, and on the same day that pledge was reduced, a wire was initiated from an account labeled Consolidation A. 2 properties were transferred at values that made no sense unless you believed in fairy tales. The paper trail didn't say fraud because paper trails seldom say the truth out loud. They hum it, and you have to bring your ear close. On the 3rd Thursday, May held up a page. This is interesting, Irene. The page showed a notarization used in 3 separate documents, each with the same date stamp, each signed by a notary named Deb. Deb, unfortunately for Lydia, had moved to Florida 4 years earlier and had surrendered her seal. May knew this because May keeps track of people the way other people keep recipes. Well now, Emmett said, leaning in, that's a song I recognize. We weren't cops. We weren't trying to be. We were 4 people seeking truth with the tools we had. If you think this is revenge, you're not wrong. If you think I did it to get my son back, you wouldn't be wrong either. But mostly, I wanted to see if the floor could tip toward fair, even for a moment, if 4 old people pushed from one side at the same time. I didn't go to the police. I went to the people who like rules as much as I do. Luella drafted a letter to the state charitable division. May compiled an affidavit about the notary and the timing. Emmett put together a packet as tidy and devastating as a report card. We mailed one set certified, hand-delivered another, and kept copies in a folder under the sink, behind the cleaning supplies where Lydia would never think to look, because she has staff for that. Then I made 9 envelopes. Inside each one, I placed something I wanted opened only when the moment would bruise. The first held a copy of the page where Consolidation A sent money that didn't belong to Lydia to a brokerage account with her married initials. The second held a letter from the notary in Florida, handwritten with that curl and the capital D that appears only in people who still write notes. The third held photos of grant recipients whose checks had bounced. The fourth, the screenshot of the text Lydia thought she sent to her assistant, but sent to the wrong group chat. We need to put Irene on a schedule. She keeps wandering in like an extra. The fifth, a copy of the tax lien the county placed on their property after a payment, wasn't processed. The sixth, the printout of a comment Lydia had left on one of her own videos from a fake account telling herself how inspiring she was. The seventh, the spreadsheet adjusted by 2 pennies per line, Luella's favorite, because you don't think pennies matter until they add up to a missing roof. The eighth, a photo of my grandchildren at a birthday party I wasn't invited to, with a note written by my granddaughter tucked behind it. Grandma, I saved you a balloon. The ninth envelope contained a letter I wrote to Mark in my own hand. I chose a paper heavier than ordinary so it would feel like a thing and not a message. It began, you can arrest a person, you can bankrupt a person, but a person has to convict himself. It ended, I am not asking for apologies. I am asking for you to be the boy who once brought me rocks because you knew I liked the ones with speckles. I didn't seal the ninth envelope until the morning I carried them all into Lydia's house. How I got invited is simple. Greed likes an audience. Lydia had begun hosting a monthly filmed family forum in which she asked questions from viewers and answered them as if life were a segment. She invited Nana to appear for a special episode about bridging the generation gap. She told Mark it would be healing. She told the camera it would be authentic. She told me to wear something neutral. I wore the dress I wore to my husband's retirement dinner 15 years before. It is navy blue and does not apologize. Mark hugged me at the door with the carefulness of a man trying not to ruin a shirt. The children were upstairs resting before they perform. Lydia's cheeks shone with a makeup that promised light that didn't leak. Irene, she said. So glad you could join us. I set the envelopes on the marble island and watched her eyes catch the fact that they were numbered. What's this? She asked. Lydia dislikes questions she cannot script. I smiled. Homework, I said. For later. For now, let's talk like a family. The first half hour was television. Lydia sat on a white couch and folded one leg over the other and spoke in long, soothing paragraphs that sounded like they were meant to be read aloud on a plane when it's late and you're trying not to be afraid. She explained that misunderstandings had created distance, but that we were, as she kept saying, moving forward. Mark nodded on cue. I answered when asked and otherwise let the room fill with her voice like steam. When the cameras cut for battery swap, I slid envelope 1 across the coffee table. A prop, I said. For your next answer. She laughed, confused and then charmed, because paper behaves for her. She opened it. She stopped laughing. She read, and as she read the color in her face changed, a tide moving in the wrong direction. You don't understand what you're looking at, she said. Of course, I said, and handed her envelope too. Mark picked it up instead. He slid the page out and read. His thumb left a damp print on the lower right corner. LYD, he said. And there it was, the old nickname spoken like a question for the first time in years. Irene, she said, and her voice lost its vowels, we can talk about this privately. She stood. She moved toward the island, toward the stack, toward a plan. I placed my hand on envelope 3 and kept it. No, I said, and I looked at my son. We have been private for 9 years. Privacy is how you lose your face. He didn't know where to look. When he was a boy and he got scared in a store, he would stare at the floor tiles and count the white ones until he felt found. There were no tiles now, just gleam. He looked at envelope 3 instead. Sit, I said to Lydia, and for a moment I saw the girl she used to be when someone else had the check. She sat. I handed her envelope 3. She read. She swallowed. Anyone can make a clerical mistake, she said. Not 3 with the same stamp from a woman who moved to Sarasota, May would have said, but I didn't invoke the choir. Lydia isn't a woman who believes in choirs unless they sing for her. The children came down for their segment. My granddaughter's hair was parted so straight it looked ironed. My grandson wore a button-down shirt and a hollow. They sat between their parents and answered questions about family traditions and what we love about Nana. It would have been sweet if sweetness were something you could film without killing. I watched my granddaughter watch me, and I wanted to give her something that wasn't this heavy. When the children went upstairs again, I placed envelope 4 between Mark and the truth. He opened it. His mouth pressed into the shape it makes when he is trying to stop a cry. I remembered the day he was 3 and tripped over a toy fire truck. He didn't cry then either. He stood up, indignant, and said that was rude, and we laughed, and then he cried because laughter can open the door to the honest thing. Envelope 5, the tax lien, created a sound in Lydia I hadn't heard before. It wasn't fear. It was calculation interrupted. "We'll settle," she said, reaching for her phone. I put my palm over the stack. "You'll listen." 6 was vanity, but I needed him to see it. The fake comment. The applause from an empty room. If you think this is small-minded, maybe it is. I have been small for 9 years. One of us had to practice. 7 was Luella's masterpiece, and I told her so later. "Pennies," she said, delighted. "They never respect pennies." 8 was the photo and the note. "I saved you a balloon," my granddaughter wrote. "Dad said you were busy, but I know you're kind of busy." Lydia lifted her chin at that, proud of a popularity she did not earn. 9 was the letter. I handed it to Mark. He held it as if warmth could be transferred by will. He read silently, then aloud. He didn't falter on the sentence about conviction. He faltered when I reminded him about the boy with the speckled rocks. He sank into the couch and covered his mouth with his hand and sat very still. That is how my son cries when there is someone in the room he does not trust. Lydia stood. "We are done," she said. She said it like a person ending a meeting, certain the minutes would reflect her version. She didn't know about the certified packets traveling toward people who audit and people who prosecute. She didn't know about the board member who had called Emmett after receiving a copy of Envelope 7 and said, "Finally, someone else hears this noise." She didn't know about the bank manager who remembered my husband's laugh and took my call. "You're done," I said softly. "We begin." For a while, everything moved the way winter does, slowly and then all at once. Questions arrived wearing badges. The foundation paused its rebrand. The charities received letters suggesting there had been errors in allocation. Lydia's channel produced one video in which she smiled too hard and said they were taking a break to focus on family. I made soup and waited, the way you do when the doctor orders tests and you find out how patient your body can be. Mark called. Often and then more often. At first it was logistics. "They're asking me about this transfer. Do you think I should hire a lawyer?" He said they as if the world were a group he had not joined. I told him yes to both questions and to none. Later, the calls were quieter. He asked about recipes. He asked about the baby's first word, if I remembered his. "Dada," I said, and then shoe, and then, weirdly, lizard. He laughed with the sound of a man hearing something he once knew by heart. He began to stop by when it was light out. He helped me replace the storm windows. He lifted boxes as if weight were an apology he could offer in 50-pound increments. I did not save him from what was coming. I did not need to. He had saved himself the minute he read the 9th envelope out loud. The day the board of the foundation voted to place Lydia on administrative leave pending the outcome of an inquiry, she posted a photo of a cappuccino with a heart in the foam and wrote, "Self-care." That night, Emmett called. "They're moving to sell the house," he said, glee wrapped in ethics. "Expediency," he quoted Lydia, "in service of our evolving vision." "They mean they need money," I said. "Let's be precise." He chuckled. "I love you when you're a librarian with an axe." I had thought the revenge would feel like dessert. Instead, it felt like an apology arriving at the end of the wrong day. Satisfying, yes. But my hands still shook when I set the kettle on the stove. Revenge is a rebuild, not a demolition. You still have to decide what to do with the lot. I decided to build something small and indestructible, a trust for the children, structured so that the money had to be spent on unglamorous things, tutors, textbooks, braces, camp scholarships. None of which shows up in filtered photos, but all of which make a life that doesn't tilt when the wind blows. The trust would activate only if their parents cooperated with certain conditions. Weekly uninterrupted time with me for a year, no filming the children for public consumption, and an audit of any family channel. Income placed directly in the children's accounts. Is that legal? Mark asked when I told him. Everything I do is legal, I said, and Luella nodded like an amen. I registered a lien when the county put their property tax notices online. I didn't plan to take their house. I wanted them to pay attention. And they did. The day the notice arrived, Lydia came to see me for the first time without a camera. She looked smaller in my kitchen than she did on her stage. You'd think money would make a person massive. Sometimes it just outlines the edges. I am here to negotiate, she said, taking a seat without being asked. I poured tea. Saturday, you're here to listen, I said. She explained how hard she was working to fix everything. She explained how none of this was intentional. She said, hurt people, like a password that should open any door. She cried with practiced shoulders. When she finished, I slid a single envelope across the table. It wasn't numbered. Inside was a printout of a line from Ethan's will that she had not mentioned once since this began, the part where he described his sister as my earliest friend and my most complex love, and then wrote, "May this money be used to make the world slightly better than it would be without you." She stared at it a long time. He loved me, she said finally, as if it were a defense. Yes, I said. What a shame you didn't try to deserve it. She stood to go. You think you've won, she said. You are very old, Irene. I smiled. I am, I said. And that means I have more time behind me than ahead. I intend to spend none of it pretending that your convenience is my duty. She left. She did not take the envelope. The inquiry ended without handcuffs. Lydia is not the sort of criminal the world likes to see punished. She is proficient at curated regret. A settlement hushed the noisiest pages. The foundation hired a new director and set the old name back above the door. The notary complaint resulted in a small fine for a person no longer using her stamp. The charities received checks with apologies that mentioned systemic miscommunication. It was not the justice a younger me would have called complete. But it was the kind you get most days if you push steadily enough. Mark moved into a rented townhouse near the school where I used to teach. The first time he picked up the kids from my house on a Wednesday after homework and chicken soup, he stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets and said, "She says I chose you." He looked at the floor, where the mat I've had for 20 years says welcome in letters worn to the color of tea. I keep thinking about that. How the choice should never have been anything but both. That's because you're kind, I said. And because you think your choices have to make somebody happy. They just have to make sense. We sat on the steps. He told me he'd started seeing a therapist. He told me the children didn't understand where the cameras went and that he wasn't sure how to explain the absence of an audience. Tell them the truth, I said. That we got confused about where home is. The first Saturday the children stayed overnight with me as part of the trust, I put on a pot of spaghetti sauce and taught my granddaughter how to play cribbage. My grandson sat at the table and carefully drew a lizard with speckles in 3 colors, and then slid it across the table without a word. We watched a movie from my childhood, and he found it boring. I said, "We can turn it off," and he looked up as if I had invented mercy. At church, an old friend squeezed my arm, Scandal's universal language, and whispered, "Heard you gave them what for?" I smiled. "I gave them the floor level," I said, and she laughed, puzzled. Not everyone likes metaphor for breakfast. Spring came late, and then furiously. The peonies tried to knock the house down with their smell. I bought soil and lost track of time in the afternoons. I don't think about Lydia much now. Sometimes I see her in town with sunglasses so large they look like a costume for a different role. Sometimes I see her car at a private school with tuition that could fund a library roof. She has moved the camera mostly off the children. She posts about resilience and grit and reinvention. There are worse things people reinvent themselves into than someone slightly quieter. When I walk past the courthouse now, I nod to the columns like old colleagues. The clerks know my name. A boy who once sat in my classroom works security there, and he smiles when he sees me, and I feel again that thing I loved about teaching, lives you touched going on ahead of you like lanterns. If this is a detective story, It's because I learned to pay attention to the ordinary. The clues were never hidden. They were in the nap windows, the edited captions, the rounded numbers, the way a girl raised by applause can't look you in the eye when you ask for facts. I did not need a magnifying glass, only a willingness to see what I could see and to name it without asking permission. If this is a revenge story, it's because I decided my pain could have a job. Revenge is a bad word for good work if what you mean is not flame but light. I didn't burn their house down. I turned on the porch light and stood where the camera could not flatter, and I waited for the moment when truth is the only thing left that fits. I sometimes consider the 9 envelopes like beads on a string. One for each year, one for each million, one for each time I told myself grace will fix what boundaries won't. I understand now that grace without borders becomes erasure. I will not be erased again, not by a child I taught to speak or by a woman who thinks money can teach the world her name. There is a photo on my mantle that was taken last week. The 4 of us stand in front of the dogwood tree. My granddaughter's hair is messy. My grandson's shirt is untucked. Mark's hand rests on my shoulder and mine rests over it like a seal. The dogwood is in bloom and looks a little like paper someone cut carefully and hung from a string. We are not smiling. We are looking at the camera as if it were a person we might tell the truth to. On the back, I wrote, "We found the floor. You might want to know what happened to Lydia's $9 million. Some of it became marble that reflects nobody. Some of it became breakfasts in cities that don't remember you when you leave. Some of it will fund the tuition at a place with a motto about honor. Some of it paid for lawyers who speak fluent apology. Enough of it is still sitting somewhere that she can pretend it is a plan. Money is loud when you have it and loud when you don't, and sometimes the only kindness you can offer people who love noise is to stop listening. The trust for the children pays monthly. We make the transfers on Wednesday afternoons because that's when I remember there are more kinds of wealth than any court can inventory. The kids learn to make sauce. I taught them to fold a fitted sheet, and my granddaughter did it better than me on her 3rd try because life is occasionally generous in ways you can prove. When I tidy at night, I still apologize if I bump a chair. Some habits remain. But if I hit my hip on the corner of the table, I say, "Excuse me," and I add, "That will leave a bruise," and I smile because a bruise is a thing your body uses to teach you a map. If you watch the video of the day with the envelopes, someone uploaded an edit. The internet is nothing if not efficient. You will see that my hand doesn't shake. You will see that my son looks at me when I speak. You will see that money can't film an answer to a question it refuses to hear. You will not see what I felt, the sensation of a floor, mine, at last, tilting toward level. When I lie awake now, it isn't because I'm rewinding conversations to find the place where I could have said the magic word. It's because I am old and my bones hum, and the peonies are almost too much for the night to stand. I think about the small things that built the large ones: paper, pens, sticky tabs, the humility to ask for help, the stubbornness to plan in ink. I think about the boy who brought me rocks with speckles, and how he is a man who answers the phone when I call. I think about how the word Nana is still the sweetest word in my house when spoken by a child with sauce on his chin. If you're still here, listening, know this: revenge looks like ruin from a distance. Up close, it looks like repair. It looks like 9 envelopes placed in order on a table. It looks like hands that have cooked meals for 40 years writing a letter that says, "I refuse to vanish." It looks like a woman who once apologized to furniture telling the world, "Finally, make room."
Your watch to the end. Be click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.